Urban disinvestment, deterioration, and abandonment cost American cities millions of dollars each year. Essential services like fire protection, law enforcement, and public health, competing for shrinking tax dollars, are severely reduced. This decay destroys community spirit so vital to a city's character. Earlier in this century, textile mills in Lawrence, Massachusetts, an old industrial community 26 miles north of Boston, employed wave upon wave of immigrants, riding high on the sea of rapid industrialization. But the gradual loss of manufacturing jobs in recent years drove away middle-class workers and their families. New immigrants, though, continue to fill the homes vacated by longtime residents. Only the continuing growth in low-income neighborhoods has kept Lawrence from losing population. With owners abandoning their properties, declining city revenues forced cutbacks that reduced firefighting personnel by 50% in 10 years. Population changes and increasing demands for services further contributed to Lawrence's troubles. A wake-up call was about to ring. By spring of 1992, the city was in crisis. Lawrence, Massachusetts, once known as the City of Workers, was now a city on fire. The long-term loss of jobs, more people on public assistance, an increase in drug-related crimes, and changes in housing patterns resulted in hundreds of vacant, abandoned structures. These vacant structures became magnets for drug dealers, vandals, the homeless, and fires.
We were at a point where we're having spectacular fires, fully involved, three-story wood frame buildings on arrival, where basically all we could do was protect the exposures. And we had faced a lot of cuts as far as manpower, and we had also started cutting back on our arson investigations at this time.
People around here were generally scared, especially among the Hispanic community. They didn't know who was going to be next.
With so many fires, suppression forces were strained. Overworked arson investigators couldn't keep up. Investigations were difficult to complete. Regardless of efforts by authorities, traditional arson solutions were ineffective against overwhelming social, political, and legal problems. What was needed was a fundamental change in the concept of arson reduction.
Law enforcement by itself was not going to solve this problem, was not going to stop the fires. We had to jointly reduce the number of targets, increase the visibility of law enforcement on streets that were not used to it, and also begin catching large numbers of arsonists.
The traditional role for an arson task force is to develop strategies and implement programs using available resources within the community. Many communities have used the task force model successfully in the last 15 years. But in Lawrence, officials were faced with inadequate resources, a lack of direction, and an escalating fire problem.
You'd go to a good working fire, and while that was going on, you'd have another response to a 2-alarm fire, and another response to a 3-alarm fire. It wasn't unusual for us to have 3 multiple alarm fires going on in the city at the same time.
Some nights you would have 2 going at once. You might have 3 in a night, and then you might go a couple of nights or a week without having a spectacular fire. But it averaged out so that you couldn't relax.
And you never caught up between fire prevention and the fires. In fact, not only did you never get caught up, in many cases you couldn't get started.
Authorities needed to bring order quickly to the chaos of a community in crisis. In doing so, state and local authorities learned 5 valuable lessons in arson task force management. Organizing an arson task force must be the first priority. Giving the task force an identity, making it a recognizable entity, is critical to success. But it seemed that the only place to house the new task force was in the cellar of the main fire station.
The place was filthy, damp, because no one had been in it for some time. There was no equipment. There was 1 phone. The Xerox was broken. There was no evidence rooms. Nothing was set up to house an arson task force.
But even with the space at the fire department, there was no budget for needed office equipment.
We did provide some just basic materials to the task force, things like typewriters and things of that nature that weren't there.
We get a fax machine donated. We get typewriters donated. We get some phones put in. We went to the fire chief and told him we needed, another couple more phones. We went to the police department. We got interns. We did everything we could think of to get more help. We went to the business community and got some things donated, so we became very good at acquiring things.
The next immediate need was to staff the task force with qualified investigators, recruited from the Federal Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, local fire and police, and carefully selected officers from the state police.
You have to find workers. Now, we were fortunate in here to have enough latitude because of the crisis here to be able to point to individuals and request them.
With the physical aspects of task force headquarters completed, task force members quickly developed procedures for its operation. But more importantly, by sharing resources and talents, task force investigators began to make things happen. The first arrest was the result of an ATF sting operation.
We were able to make 2 arrests in the first arson sting and 3 arrests in the second arson sting. They were highlighted in a big way by the local media, and I think by the fact that the task force was able to make these arrests, it put the arsonist in the city of Lawrence on notice that we're here now, and all these fires that you've been getting away with in the past are going to stop now because we're going to start catching you and we're going to start prosecuting you and putting you in jail for these arsons.
Organizing the task force into a working group is an important first step. But the existence of a task force alone will not curb the crime of arson.
We attempted to put a police presence on the street during the hours where the fires were occurring most frequently.
Overnight patrols of fire-stricken neighborhoods began almost immediately. Identifying the vacant buildings that attracted the homeless, juveniles, and drug dealers, officers entered each building, making a list of people they encountered. In addition to the deterrent factor, street visibility also built trust and confidence, even among the most unlikely people.
People, like prostitutes, are on the street every single night. They know all the players, they talk to all the people, they hear the information, and the secret is to get them to trust you enough to tell you what they know and not feel like they're going to be spending the weekend in jail or several months in jail for different warrants they have. And that was a big thing, was trying to work with them, extract information. And we've got to the point now where they've actually come to court and testified in an open court on arson cases. And I think that has a lot to do with the task force and the way that we've worked with people.
Street visibility in arson-prone neighborhoods raises community awareness of the crime and builds a database of possible targets and suspects. But one of the more significant strategies required training, support, and perseverance. Unlike more traditional arson incidents, the Lawrence fires involved a number of motives.
We had a series of arson fires that really seemed to have no reason or pattern, and they really were beyond the scope of handling of the local fire department, both in their ability to respond quickly and to investigate the fires.
An essential element to the success of the Lawrence Task Force was a process of investigating each fire using a protocol developed by the State Fire Marshal's Office and provided to each investigator.
We're convinced, through trial and error, that it's this protocol, a witness-driven protocol, getting to the scene early, investigating every single fire, investigating witnesses, as many as you can, as fast as you can. That's what's going to produce results.
In addition to increased presence in the stricken neighborhoods and thorough investigations, the task force recognized the need for public information in order to keep the arson problem before the eyes of the public. Due to the almost immediate success of the task force, local news media were able to actively assist in each investigation.
I think the people who ran the task force quickly understood that in order for the public to believe in them and to give them cooperation and for them to have credibility, they had to see some results. And one of the quickest ways for them to see these results was for them to invite us along, give us the stories that we normally would have covered anyway, and to read them in the paper, and which is what happened.
Neighborhood watch programs that have worked in other communities met with limited success in Lawrence.
It's a rather disparate community between different countries of origin, different social clubs, different churches. There's a lot of splintering in the community in terms of how they're organized, and it's very difficult to kind of get the community kind of rallied around something, because you pretty much would have to almost walk door to door, I think, to pretty much get them going.
In the absence of additional city funds, volunteer groups pitched in.
We approached people with a vested interest, the banks and other people, and asked them for cash contributions, and some companies gave equipment in kind. A local Chevrolet dealer donated a used van. And as I say, the hospital, Arlington Hospital, donated all the emergency equipment for the van. The vocational school outfitted it with the interior shelving and everything. And the lettering was done for nothing. Even the car phone, everything was donated.
Volunteer efforts increased the visibility of the arson problem and helped shift some of the responsibility for deterrence from law enforcement personnel to the people who were most affected.
We can't just let this happen to us. We have something to say about what goes on here, and we can't complain about the fact and just live in fear. We have to do something, as if not, we are victims, and that we don't have to be that way. Encouraging people to kind of try to at least take some sort of a role in it, whatever they could do, and at least help the folks who are trying to get to the bottom of this.
The task force quickly learned what arson-related events attracted the media, as well as the attention of the arsonists.
When people began to pick up the newspaper and see pictures of people in handcuffs being led away, I think that convinced them that the task force was here to stay.
There's a lot of talent in the law enforcement area and the fire service, and the secret is to use that talent.
Within weeks, arrests and convictions increased, and public cooperation grew. But 500 vacant buildings continued to be major targets for arson. At best, these buildings needed to be re-inhabited, but given a declining economy, this seemed unlikely.
We identified a group of about 50 houses that needed to be boarded on an emergency basis. In many cases, these only required one entrance to be boarded.
Boarding up abandoned buildings can effectively block access to arson-prone properties, but the effort requires materials which are expensive and trained people.
We went to the Sheriff's Department and asked for prisoners. Then we went to the National Guard and asked for supervisors and trucks. They started to take buildings that we identified, the Arson Task Force, through our night searches as being the most at risk. These were generally ones that were filled with debris that could be easily set on fire. We approached the Lumbermen's Association, there's a number of lumber yards around here, to obtain scrap lumber that was not good for retail use. But what we would do was take this scrap lumber and use that to board up buildings as well. Later, we got another $3,000 donation from a big lumber yard that saw we were trying to do the right thing.
As effective as the board-up program has been in reducing the incidence of arson, the most effective technique was applying witness-driven investigation procedures to a traditional fire scene-based investigation.
I got called to a fire about 2 o'clock in the morning. It was in August. It was really hot. And when I got there, there was 3 buildings were totally burning as much as I've ever seen a fire burn. When the fire finally cleared and we got settled in, across the street from this area was a basketball court. I brought my basketball and shorts to work. I worked out for 3 days in the basketball court, and within a couple of days I knew who lit the fire through the kids.
There were 4 key factors in controlling arson in Lawrence. Communities beginning arson task forces should consider each of these carefully. 1. Lawrence officials identified specific arson problems and focused their efforts and resources to reduce only those problems.
In terms of working task force, this was as effective a task force as I've ever seen.
2. Cooperation was critical among agencies with the authority to legally deal with arson and those whose lives are most affected by arson.
It's not arresting people, it's not beating doors down, it's not staking things out. It's the ability from one person to talk to another person.
3. The mix of personal styles and abilities combined effectively into a cohesive arson unit.
So you have divergent groups that in any cities don't always get along with each other. Now they're all sharing the same office and they work together.
And finally, A commitment by task force members, government officials, and the community was necessary to reduce the arson problems.
Invite them in. All of them will bring something to the investigation, will bring something to solve the problem.
Arson affects the entire community. When a structure burns, jobs burn. Resources are destroyed and lives lost. Arson is not an isolated crime. It is a crime against society, and all of society pays. There are no simple answers.
Yeah, but it's not the problem, it's a symptom. It's a part of a much, much larger problem that, commenced, several years ago.
If an effective solution is to be found, attitudes must change. Proper training for fire and police must be given. Investigation tools must be made available. And the public must be made aware of the price it pays for unabated arson. Arson is a crime that crosses organizational boundaries. Its control then lies in a broad-based, innovative, and flexible approach. If it happened in Lawrence, it can happen anywhere.